Imagine the sudden silence after a sound you cannot name, the sound a human mind recognizes instantly as danger. Imagine light shrinking to a single trembling circle, breath shortening not from fear alone but because the very air around you is changing, growing heavier with dust. Picture that confined space pressing in from all sides until every movement feels impossible. These are not scenes from a movie. These are moments that have happened to people just like you and me, people who thought a quick adventure would be harmless, people who learned in the most brutal way how small choices can become life or death. If you want to hear the full truth about what went wrong, and how it could be prevented, subscribe to Cave Explained now so you don't miss the kinds of stories and safety lessons that can save lives. Our first story begins on a warm summer day when a small group of teenagers walked into a cave because it promised something thrilling and new. They did not have the kind of gear an experienced caver would bring. Their lights were cheap, their batteries spare, and helmets were nowhere to be found. The cave opened comfortably at first, enough room to stand and walk, and curiosity pushed them deeper. The true danger came not from water or darkness but from the rock itself. In a narrow offshoot they found a crack that seemed to lead further into the earth. One by one they squeezed through, driven by the kind of excitement that blinds people to warning signs. Two of them pushed farther than the rest. At some point, a stone that had been resting for who knows how long dislodged. Dust fell like rain. A boulder crashed down behind them and sealed the passage. What had been a thrill became a coffin-sized prison. Inside that tiny space they had each other, a fading circle of light, and the slow realization that shouting would not change the weight of rock pressing in. Air became stale and warm. Muscles cramped simply from being unable to shift. Outside, their friends made a dash back to the surface to find help, and rescuers arrived carrying tools designed for exactly this kind of nightmare, but tools mean nothing if they cannot reach the trapped space easily. Rescues in cramped passages are a study in patience and meticulous work. People took turns passing equipment through tight bends. Pulleys were rigged, and slowly, very slowly, the boulder that had sealed the passage was moved. When the trapped teenagers finally crawled free, exhausted and shaken, they stepped into a world that felt unreal after hours spent under the earth. That escape was not a miracle so much as the patient persistence of rescuers who knew how to work inch by inch under impossible conditions. The next story takes us into water. Caves and rivers have a relationship that is both beautiful and deadly. In one system, a group of novice cavers planned a route expecting a long but manageable day underground. They ran into thigh-deep water in a large chamber and discovered that their planned bypass was submerged. One volunteer agreed to swim a long submerged passage to reach the air beyond. Swimming in a cave is not like swimming in a pool. It is a dim, narrow, and disorienting experience where the resistance of cold water and the weight of adrenaline sap strength faster than you expect. The swimmer made progress but then fatigue hit hard. Panic followed. When he called for help and vanished beneath the water, the trained companion without hesitation dove in. He reached his friend, who had become barely conscious, and in doing so nearly lost both of them to the same watery trap. The rescuer managed to push them toward a muddy bank and kept the survivor awake with food and warmth while someone on the surface alerted professionals. When rescue teams arrived, they faced the task of moving through water that could change unpredictably as they worked. The operation was long and painstaking, but in the end the survivor was brought back from the edge. Those who study cave rescues will tell you that the combination of cold water, tight passages, and fatigue breeds hypothermia faster than most people imagine. Even a short time in cold, moving water drains body heat. Clothing that gets wet can cling and freeze against the skin, and the mind begins to misjudge distances and effort. Training, layered clothing, and recognizing when a passage is beyond your skill level are the difference between coming back with a story and never coming back at all. Another group set out wanting adventure with an experienced guide leading the way. The weather had recently turned, and waters that had been calm were now angry. They faced a descent through a thunderous waterfall, followed by a drop that funneled them into icy pools. At one point the route narrowed into a traverse that was almost impossible to pass without help. A board had been placed across the gap to offer a foothold, but the space itself plummeted out of sight. The leader offered the chance to turn back. They pressed on. Someone wedged and could not move, and panic did the rest. Years of training could not blunt the first surge of adrenaline when a body becomes stuck, hips locked into stone, with not enough space to wiggle free. Rescue teams brought down experienced cavers with tools and strategies for widening or breaking rock, but the risk of injury and hypothermia was high. After hours of careful work in a slow, delicate process of removing the material that held the person trapped, he was freed and taken to medical care with severe cold and exhaustion. There are a few recurring themes here. One is that experienced people can get trapped just as easily as novices when the environment is unforgiving. Another is that time underground is not the same as time above ground. Every minute spent in a constrained, cold, muddy place changes the situation. Rescuers cannot rush without risking more harm. They must work methodically because a wrong move can collapse a passage or worsen the trapped person's position. Some caves are tiny at their entrance, so small that getting in feels like threading your body through a living seam. One group found an opening scarcely wider than a dinner plate. Dropping into the cave revealed another vertical change, then a twisting crawl that left almost no room for movement. One member, older but fit, volunteered to go first. He slid down and reached a place where he could breathe easier and look ahead at the route. But returning through the slot proved far harder. What had been a gravity-assisted slide down became a near impossible climb up. Wet clothing clung to his skin, making the slot feel smaller. Handholds were slick with water. The rope that had been left above for security was hard to operate in such narrow space. The team tried to pull him from below, but every pull only wedged him further. When the team called for professional cave rescuers, the trapped caver had been inside for a long stretch of hours and was battling cold and exhaustion. Rescue teams arrived with specialist rigging to distribute force and to avoid dragging the trapped person against sharp rock. They provided warm clothing and hot drinks when they could pass them down, and slowly the rigging bought enough leverage to coax the caver free. He walked out bruised but alive. Children and teenagers in groups present their own challenges. In one incident, a troop of young boys entered a local cave with two counselors who, for the moment, stayed outside. The interior was dry and narrow and seemed safe at first glance, drawing the boys in deeper and deeper. In a hairpin turn, two of the boys became stuck, one conscious and fighting, the other losing consciousness from the cold and lack of movement. When their friends ran for help, panic echoed in the narrow passages and quick decisions had to be made. Outside, a small fire made to keep warm was quickly put out to avoid using up oxygen, and professionals were called. Rescuers used chisels and hand tools to widen the tight spot, and they worked carefully to avoid causing more harm. When both boys were finally recovered, both showed signs of severe cold exposure and needed immediate medical care. The lesson is stark: even seemingly mild cave environments can become lethal when people are unprepared or when groups assume the terrain is easier than it is. One of the most heartbreaking stories involves two friends who underestimated how quickly cold water and poor equipment combine into a deadly situation. They entered a cave with a huge, sheer pit at the entrance and, though they had wetsuits in their car, they decided against using them. One of them neglected to wear a helmet. As they descended into the pit, freezing water poured over them, chilling their hands and backs, reducing their ability to work with ropes and hardware. One of them reached a point where his gear began to slip from his hands and his strength ebbed away. He tried to climb, to reattach, but the torrent was relentless. His friend pulled and fought against the elements until he could no longer keep both of them safe. In the worst moment, he had to make the decision to cut a connection and climb out alone to get help. When rescuers arrived, they found the other man had succumbed to hypothermia. It is a grim reminder that the cold does the quiet killing. It sneaks up until movement becomes impossible and the muscles betray you. Across all these stories, rescue teams repeat one message: preparation saves lives. That preparation is simple in concept and not expensive in principle. A hard helmet, an appropriate light source and spare batteries, proper clothing for the environment, a plan shared with someone on the surface, and the humility to turn back when a passage looks worse than expected. Caving with inexperienced companions increases risk, especially if the group lacks one person who understands the route and the risks. Even the best gear cannot make a bad choice safe, but good gear gives rescuers and companions something to work with when things go wrong. These episodes also show how rescues are not glamorous. They are long, technical, and at times gruesome. Teams must be trained in rigging and shoring techniques. They must carry equipment through winding passages, sometimes with only 1 or 2 people able to work at the narrow face where a trapped person waits. Tools are far heavier underground than they are on the surface. Rescuers manage fatigue, cold, and the constant risk of making a wrong move that could injure the person they are trying to save. Often, the rescue succeeds because people put one foot in front of the other and do the slow, relentless work of moving rock, passing tools, rigging pulleys, and tending to the trapped person's immediate needs. But these stories are not meant only to frighten. They are meant to instruct. If you plan to explore caves, take these simple rules seriously. Always let someone know your route and expected return. Never go alone. Carry redundant light sources and spare batteries. Wear a helmet. Dress for the cold and wet conditions underground. And when in doubt, turn back. Know the signs of hypothermia and how to treat someone while you wait for help. Learn how to move in confined spaces and practice calm breathing techniques for when panic threatens. Before we close, imagine again the small circle of light that was the only thing keeping someone connected to the world above. Picture the rescuers who, having seen the worst that caves can offer, come back time and again because they believe it is always worth trying to pull someone back into the sunlight. These are not neat cautionary tales. They are real people with families and jobs and passions, and they deserve our respect. If you found these stories gripping, subscribe to Cave Explain now to get more deeply researched narratives that combine human drama with practical safety lessons. If you value accuracy, please like the video and leave a comment with your thoughts. Tell us which incident surprised you the most, or share a near miss of your own if you are comfortable. Would you go caving after hearing these stories? What single safety rule would you insist every group follow? Share your answers below so we can discuss them. Your comments help make this community safer and wiser. Thank you for listening. If you want more, say so in the comments and I will prepare a follow-up episode that goes deeper into rescue techniques, the kit professionals carry, and how a careful plan can change everything.